What up, party peeps? We're back every week. Well, I guess every other week, we do an Ask Me Anything on my Instagram to answer your questions in a long form setting. We post those and collects all of the information for us. So thank you so much, CJ, for doing that.
Yeah, no problem. This week, what we asked y'all about anxious attachment. So what do you think about anxious attachment, having anxious attachment, and healing anxious attachment was the big one that we're going to address. I'm CJ. I'm the brand director, and I ask the questions.
Yes, she does. She's very good at that. My name's Cody. I've got a degree in cognitive neuroscience, and I am trained in IFS psychotherapy, IFS practitioner. So that's the angle that a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today dives into. So I'm really excited, and especially the nervous system, because the nervous system has a huge part to play in any type of attachment, but especially anxious attachment. So it should be a great conversation.
Without further ado, let's get into it. Before we dive too deep in, can you just quickly define anxious attachment for those who maybe haven't joined us for some previous videos?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I talk about this in a lot of different ways, but anxious attachment is what happens when love felt unpredictable and your nervous system decided that it would never be caught off guard again, essentially. So there's some really interesting research that comes from John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth. They're kind of the OGs that we can dive into, but that's kind of the baseline definition. I think talking about some of the history could be interesting because this is where what it looks like, where it comes from, essentially. And before they were like Instagram reels, this was actually like real observations that researchers have done. It's one of the most well-studied psychological phenomenons like ever. It's wild. But Dr. John Bowlby was the guy who he wasn't really trying to explain texting anxiety or approach anxiety or any of these things initially. He was studying what happens when you separate children from their caregivers. And that's where a lot of anxious attachment or attachment research comes from. He worked with children that were separated from their parents during World War II specifically, and he noticed that kids that were separated like this didn't just get sad, their entire nervous system changed. Okay, so he saw protesting, he saw like crying, being anxious, yelling, searching, that kind of stuff, despair, detachment in separated kids. What his big conclusion was that this wasn't just dependency, it was biological. So he said that attachment isn't a weakness, it's an evolutionary survival system. And I think that's really freaking important for people to understand and know about all attachments, especially anxious attachment. Mary Ainsworth stress tested this theory essentially, and that's why she and Bowlby and her are like two like luminaries in this space. But she created something called the strange situation experiment, which is kind of wild for its time. But essentially they brought a baby into the room, let it explore, and then the caregiver, the mom, usually would leave, and then the caregiver would come back. The mom would come back essentially. And anxious attachment specifically, what that would look like is the anxious children would become really distressed when the mom leaves. And then when she comes back, and this is the really important part, when the mom would come back, what she noticed is that they would seek comfort, but can't settle still. They're angry, they're clingy, they're dysregulated still. So the anxious kid doesn't just want proximity, they're really wanting reassurance and proximity that won't disappear again. And so that is something to kind of think about whenever you think about anxious attachment. And they both kind of argued that humans form these internal working models of relationships, which is what attachments are in general. And if care is inconsistent, so like love is unpredictable, the kid starts to think that I must amplify signals to keep it. So the crying and the protest behavior and those types of things, or they do those things to try and keep the love. And then if closeness felt unstable as well. So anxious attachment is really what's happening when comfort was sometimes there and sometimes not. And that inconsistent like caregiving essentially sensitizes people's threat detection system. Okay. And so kids can start to learn to monitor micro shifts. Hypervigilance becomes a relational like strategy. Their amygdala doesn't really care, like in today's day and age, that the person is busy, right? It only cares about being abandoned. So anxious attachment it's not dramatic, it's adaptive. And that's something really important to kind of think about. It's not about neediness. It's a nervous system that learned that love could disappear. And so the behaviors that you see today, hypertexting, like super highly anxiously attached people, they'll text you 1,000,000 times to figure out where you're at. They call you 1,000,000 times. If you don't respond or you use a period instead of an exclamation point, they notice that. And they're like, what's going on? And they start to notice, for real or not real, whether their stories are telling or their actually objective truths, they start to notice those things because they're so hypervigilant and they're so worried that love could disappear. And so it's a survival mechanism that spikes. Any attachment researcher would tell you that it's a protest behavior, not pathology. These are parts of these people that are worried about losing connection and losing love and being abandoned and neglected. Their nervous system is in fight or flight. And that's why those behaviors that you see, like really squeezing on super tight to relationships, that's where it comes from all of this research and all of this relational operating system that they're running. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think that makes sense. I mean, especially so when it has to do with consistency, right? I mean, especially like in our nervous system, we we crave routine and stuff. And so if you're not able to predict that because of past behaviors, then that becomes really, really difficult to just exist with.
Yeah, 100%. And IFS brings in the concept that it's a part of you that's anxiously attached, or more importantly, like a set of core wounds that you then have protective, like texting all the time, hypervigilance, people pleasing, all of these different things that you do to make sure that you're not abandoned, neglected, emotionally abused, whatever it is, ever again. So, and some of those protest behaviors can be more extreme, which IFS would consider firefighters, which are like that predicting the future, like the people pleasing or the just general anxiety or the hypervigilance or the being like an empath and being able to read people's emotions really rapidly and stuff. All of those are protective mechanisms guarding that little one that was at inconsistent care and love and attention when they were younger.
Now that we know what anxious attachment is, let's talk a little bit about like how it interacts with anxiety in general. So someone asked, how do I know if I'm anxious because of life or them?
Yeah, this is a beautiful one. So the framework and this is great because my background is cognitive neuroscience. So I think about this biologically because your mind, your brain, and your body are interconnected, separate but inseparable is how I kind of think about them. And so how do you determine if you are just anxious in general or if you're anxiously attached from a relationship standpoint? A couple things you can do. The first thing that I would always suggest people think about is body budget, right? So think inside and then outside first. So if your sleep is messed up, if you're not eating healthy, if you're not exercising, if you're not socially connecting and you're always alone and isolated, that is going to create psychological distress in your nervous system, and that will and can lead to your anxiety, generalized anxiety that you start to feel. I'm not saying that generalized anxiety disorder does not exist, but I can tell you the number of people that come to me and they're like, oh my God, I'm so anxious all the time. And I was like, okay, well, how are you sleeping? And they're like, oh, I only sleep 3 or 4 hours a night. And I'm just like, okay, your nervous system and your brain washes stress chemicals and junk out of your nervous system. Your lymphatic system just goes through your brain and your nervous system and washes that stuff out and clears out the inflammation over nighttime. So if you're not doing that at nighttime, your brain is sitting in a toxic wasteland. Like your brain literally floats in cerebral spinal fluid in your skull, in your brain, or like in your skull. Yeah. And if you don't wash that stuff out, then your brain is just sitting in that inflamed cerebral spinal fluid, which can increase anxiety, biologically based. Same thing with isolation and social connection. Like your brain needs friends. Exercise is another way to get brain-derived nootropic factor into your brain, clear out stress chemicals, build you back stronger. The way that you eat can also inflame these things and create all sorts of anxiety because your mind, your brain, and your body are connected. Okay? Your mind sits in your nervous system and your brain sits in your body. So they all affect each other. Neuroscientists don't even differentiate these things oftentimes, like the mind and the body, like, or the brain and the body, like just so interconnected, it's not even funny. So that's the first step, body budget first. And then what we want to do is look inside and then outside. Generalized anxiety, number one, again, I would highly recommend looking at your body budget and understanding that. Then going internally. So if you're anxious in every single relationship, look inward. That's kind of the concept. If you are calm with some and spiraling with others, look more relationally. And so is it me or is it them? If you're in every single relationship, you are anxious, whether it is friends, family, work, doesn't matter. Maybe that might be an anxious attachment. That might be something that you want to have a conversation with and start to understand what your core wounds are and what are the things that you are trying to protect yourself from, right? Because the anxious attachment or that anxious part of you is trying to keep you safe in some way. What is it trying to keep you specifically safe from? And have that conversation with yourself on the inside first. And IFS, Internal Family Systems, has a great framework for how to work with your parts, how to work with your deeper wounds, and how to actually heal those things and do that work. And that's what I would absolutely recommend first. Right? Because once you know yourself internally, it is much easier to understand what is me versus them, internally versus externally. Most people process external to internal, which puts you at a disadvantage and removes your agency. If you can start to process internal to external, what's my body budget? And then what are my wounds? What's my stuff coming up? What's my baggage? Versus thinking everything is coming from external to internal, right? If you've got a button, thinking that, oh, people press my buttons is one way to process external to internal. Or you could say, well, why do I have the button? What if I remove the button? That's internal to external. And so that's the first step, is using IFS to process what's going on internally. And then if you're calm with some people, but spiraling with other people, again, look relationally. That could be an indicator or a red flag in relation to a toxic person or someone that is a boundary buster or someone that draws on your energy and or makes you anxious in a different way. Sometimes it can be you have an empathic part that takes on other people's emotions in a way that when they're anxious, you feel anxious. Your nervous system is data, right? Not destiny. So pay attention to those things. And again, one of the best ways to get a really clear signal on what your nervous system is saying is body budget first and foremost. Know yourself, know thyself. yourself, know what's going on internally, so you know what's yours and not yours, and then going external and figuring those things out. If it's happening inside of your intimate relationships, I can tell you right now, secure people are not going to be making you guess very often. So sometimes it could be your trauma and your baggage. Sometimes it could be your body budget. Sometimes it's their inconsistency, and sometimes there's just a wrong fit. The wisdom here is learning the difference. That's what it really takes, is starting to figure those types of things out. So that's kind of how I would think about it.
So another question on like defining anxious attachment that we got asked is, fearful avoidance sometimes misidentify as anxious attachments?
Yes, all the time. This is one of the most common things. I literally just did a whole video, a whole blog on fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment. Those are the same things. This happens all the time. It is one of the most common things that I see is that they get labeled a truly fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment, not just self-diagnosed type thing. Like, it is single percentage points in the population. So that's just something to be interested in, or that's just an interesting data point that I like to remind people of. 60 to 70% of people are securely attached. Then you have 20-ish or so anxious, 15 to 10-ish avoidant, and then single digits disorganized. Those are all ranges. Those don't all add up to perfectly to 100, right? Because they're ranges, but just think about that. But fearful avoidants look anxious until they feel close. That's where it gets really, really weird. So if you crave intimacy but panic when you get it, that isn't generally purely anxious. That's more disorganized or fearful avoidant. Someone who is more anxiously attached would say, don't leave me. A fearful avoidant would say, don't leave me, but also don't get too close. It's like, it's this push-pull connection, right? It's unresolved trauma, bottom line. And if you look at kind of like the core difference between the four of them, secure, anxious, avoidant, and disorganized, secure attachment, closeness feels regulating. And after conflict, your nervous system finds a way back to baseline. So love feels more safe and it feels more predictable, and it's about repair. You feel interdependence is high and you feel cool with closeness. And you also feel safe with distance, and you know it will return, right? That's the core concept of a secure attachment. Anxious attachment, again, closeness is regulating, but distance is threatening. The nervous system is activated and pursues connection to get safety back, like we've been talking about a little bit. Avoidant is the exact opposite of anxious. Distance feels regulating and closeness feels threatening. So the nervous system deactivates and pulls away to preserve autonomy and create safety. Very similar nervous system fight or flight response, but just in a different directions, essentially. The disorganized attachment, or the fearful avoidant, is a wild time. Disorganized is where closeness feels threatening and distance feels threatening. It's paradoxical. There's no stable strategy, and the nervous system is just caught in this loop with nowhere to go. It's terrifying. So it's not just anxious plus avoidant, right? It's its own thing. It's approach, avoidance, conflict inside of the nervous system. And it's when your brain learns that I need you to survive and you're not safe at the same exact time, which is, again, paradoxical and can look like anxious attachment, but it isn't purely anxious attachment. So again, biggest thing you can ask yourself is, do you crave intimacy but panic when you get it, right? That's a big thing. It's this push-pull that you'll feel.
How you make sure that you're correctly identifying yourself so that way you're able to like move forward on the correct healing journey. And as far as the healing journey, that video that dropped, it's called How to Heal Disorganized Attachment. So go check that out. And then there's some steps to get you on the right path.
What up? Interrupting our normal programming to announce MindBrain Body Lab's first sponsor, Apollo Neuro. This tool I have been using for years, and I recommend it to all of my clients. Apollo is the only wearable that trains your nervous system to bounce back from stress naturally without pills. Okay, if you fall asleep fast but wake up at 2 a.m. with your mind racing, like I do sometimes, did last night even, or your wearable, like Whoop, Apple Watch, or whatever, is telling you that you're stressed without actually helping you, this is for you. Apollo doesn't just track your stress and sleep. It acts and is built on a decade of neuroscience research. It learns your stress patterns, calms your nervous system in real time, and helps you stay asleep using subtle vibrations. Users get up to 60 extra minutes of sleep a night, plus 40% less stress and 25% better focus. Apollo was just featured in Forbes for their vagus nerve science, and they just published a randomized pilot study suggesting it's the first wearable that helps prevent burnout. MindBrain Body Lab subscribers get $99 off. Just hit the link in the description to grab yours. Let's dive back in.
So now that we have defined anxious attachment in a couple different ways, let's get into healing. Someone asked, is EMDR enough to heal anxious attachment? And with that, can you give us a brief overview of EMDR?
Yeah, EMDR is a great tool for healing anxious attachment. Not the only tool, but a great one. EMDR stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a really, really powerful tool. I'm a huge fan of it. Sometimes people see like the laser, or it's not a laser, but it's like a dot that looks like a laser and it bounces back and forth. It's like a laser screen type thing is the best way I can describe it. Bilateral stimulation, where people are tapping, like you can tap on your legs, you can tap like hands. There's little buzzing devices you can wear on your wrists and things like that. But the concept is that it helps your brain metabolize trauma so it stops reacting like it's happening right now. And the bilateral stimulation, what that's doing is it helps your brain reconsolidate memories without the same emotional charge by turning down your amygdala response, essentially. So EMDR would take you into a moment that was traumatizing or that was scary or that there's a big nervous system response. The bilateral stimulation helps bring down the response of your amygdala that is labeling that memory as dangerous and making you feel all of those scary threat things like your tight chest and the sweaty hands and palms and like that big response. It brings that down as you bring that memory up into your working memory and pull it back out of the warehouse of your long-term memory and into your working memory where it's malleable and you can change that memory. And at the same time, again, it's bringing that amygdala down because the first time that memory was put in, your amygdala was putting all sorts of stress signals into the memory. Okay. And so then now when it goes back in your long-term memory with all of those stress emotional hooks inside of that memory, when it comes up, it's really traumatizing. It's really scary. And so EMDR, again, is bringing that up to the front of your working memory, turning down and removing those like stress indicators and those emotional indicators from that memory, and then putting it back into your long-term memory, which is, I know it sounds wild, but is all very solid neuroscience in relation to how memories work, memory consolidation. It is extraordinarily very well documented, very well studied treatment for trauma. So it's a great tool. What I will say is that it desensitizes the wound, but that doesn't necessarily automatically build secure attachment. So what I see a lot of the time is processing that trauma and kind of bringing down some of that huge response can be like step one, but learning relational safety is step two, because you don't just heal like attachment in your head, right? You do it inside of relationships. And the first relationship is the one with yourself internally first, the relationship with yourself to your parts, and then yourself to other people's parts and out into the actual world. So insight isn't automatically integration. EMDR can turn down the fire alarm, but you still have to build a house that feels safe. Right? So IFS is a really great tool when paired with EMDR, especially for attachment type trauma, especially if you have really powerful attachment ruptures or big attachment trauma in your past, and it's just too overwhelming to go to by yourself or without some way to bring that nervous system response down. I will say that you can do IFS, and I would recommend IFS personally. Like, I'm trained in IFS, so I am biased, right? But I would recommend IFS first because there are tools inside of IFS that can help you process that deeper stuff without just blunting the response, right? You're putting a Band-Aid over something, but you're not removing the core wound and healing the core wound. You're just making it feel, you're desensitizing it, which is a really big difference. IFS is a way to close the wound and rescue the part of you that is traumatized, not just go, let's just turn the volume down on this little screaming child inside of us so that we can't hear it as loud and it doesn't scare us as much. IFS is a way to do that in a less re-traumatizing way and then actually soothe that child and rescue that child. And that is the new relational mapping and schema that IFS allows you to build, which is really, really powerful. And especially for trauma, IFS is pretty well researched as well. Research is emerging on it. It's not as well researched as EMDR. I'll give you that for sure. But EMDR is a great tool. I highly recommend it. There are so many of my clients that are doing EMDR and I'm helping them do parts work at the same time. It can be really, really powerful. It's not a cure-all. And insight, again, is not integration. The best way to think about it is that EMDR can help you turn down that fire alarm, but you really do need to create a safe house as well. You can't just turn off the fire alarm. You've got to put out the fires and you've got to actually do the work to make that house safe and feel like home, if that makes sense.
I'll tie in this question. How much of this can be done while not in a romantic relationship?
For sure. So you can become more secure when you're single, but attachment wounds reveal themselves when someone matters, right? You didn't get this wound in isolation. You got it inside of a relationship. And so to heal that wound, to fully heal it, you need to really get to a point where you are able to interact with another human being and their nervous system, because that will bring up stuff that you didn't even know you had. And that's where you really get into some of the deeper work. But bottom line, like, you can heal patterns alone, but you heal attachment really in connection. Your partner torments you, in a certain way because they bring up your baggage. They bring up things you didn't even know. They bring up wounds. They bring up vulnerability. They bring up all of these things that you couldn't possibly figure out when you're in the perfectly safe environment and there's no triggers and there's nothing going on. I see this all the time with my clients. They're like, oh, I feel perfect. And then they start to date again, or they start to think about dating again. And all this stuff comes up, and which makes perfect sense because when you're in a plastic bubble, of course, everything is perfectly fine and you feel completely safe. That's amazing, but that's not life. You got to get out there and see what comes up and allow people to torment you, because if you understand IFS and you've built that relationship with yourself, you know your parts, you know your baggage, you know your wounds, you can start to communicate for your baggage and your stuff more effectively. And you have language and a system and a process for developing and working on yourself internally. And so your partner can torment you, but it is also your best mentor because they're going to mirror back to things where you still have work, where you still need to work on stuff. They know you at a deeper level and they can call things out, right? It's hard to read the label from inside the bottle. They can read the label from outside the bottle more effectively. When you're in that single season is for learning nervous system regulation, starting to learn your parts, build your unique identity outside of the relationship and feel really whole inside of yourself. You can do a lot of work there because I really believe that if you can't self-soothe alone, then you will co-regulate in a desperate way and your partner will feel that, right? They will feel that your regulation completely depends on them. And that's a lot of pressure to completely put on a partner. Learning to self-soothe and regulate your nervous system and understand your parts when in the single seasons, I think is really, really, really powerful. And then practicing secure behaviors again, internally and with close friends and family before trying to date again, I think is a really powerful framework as well, because you don't need a partner to build your worth. Like that's inside of you. It's just inherent in you. And if you don't believe that, you're going to date and try to be with someone that will prove your worth as opposed to know your worth. And then they can help you expand and grow and learn and tormentor you, essentially. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and we've talked about this is getting back into a relationship is a part of the healing journey. You can't complete your healing journey before then. There's more on that in our video on feeling chosen, which is you can't fix what your parents broke. So go check that out if you want to know a little bit more in depth, kind of what those steps look like. So for the healing journey, somebody asked the golden question that I'm sure a lot of you are wondering, which is, when is it right to start the dating journey again? They also added in this, I feel unshackled, but I still hold care for my exes.
Yeah, so I would be less concerned with still caring about your ex and more concerned about the pattern of lurking externally for answers that are inside of you, right? So the question here is, are you approaching dating from a place of wholeness? Do you know how to truly love yourself like we've been talking about? Do you know how to choose yourself like we just talked about? Have you looked at your deepest wounds and learned to become your own internal parent so your partner doesn't have to be that thing for you? Like, are you starting to date again to get away from fear, uncertainty, or doubt? Or are you coming at it from a place of abundance, right? Missing someone doesn't mean that you're not healed. And honestly, I would say like it's a good sign, a green flag. Care is not the same thing as like craving, okay? If you want them back to feel okay, you're probably not ready, okay? But if you'd be okay, whether they came back or not, you're probably closer. You're probably getting to that place where you're feeling a lot better, okay? So you don't start dating just when you're over them. You start to date when you're over abandoning yourself consistently. That's the key distinction really here. And when to really start to think about, when are you ready to start dating again? And I'm not here to tell you that, well, I can't tell you that. I can't tell you that. You gotta figure that out for yourself and then go test it. Be a scientist. In my Becoming Her program, this is exactly what I recommend to them. In the last 3 weeks, it's all about skills to go have these conversations and run these experiments. We teach them something called the action cycle, which turns them into a scientist, right? Where they go act, assess, adjust, right? I did this in my own healing journey as well. After my last breakup, it had been a few months and I was like, okay, I think maybe I'm ready to start dating again. So I went on a couple of dates, I took action, and then I assessed, I think that I'm doing this to distract myself and to move away from feelings and thoughts and these types of things. And I'm still comparing these new people to my ex as opposed to allowing them to be who they are and seeing if that works or not, which is I determined in my assessment phase of that experiment that I need some more time. I need to do some more work on the things that are coming up as I go on these dates. And I made that assessment. I talked about it with my therapist. I created a plan around the things I needed to work on internally before I would be ready to start dating again. I made that adjustment. I did that work and took action on that plan. And now in my most recent bout of getting back into dating, I'm coming from much more a place of wholeness and curiosity and compassion and courage and confidence and playfulness, as opposed to trying to fill in some gap or hole. I have created a system and like a relationship with my own parts and my own self and my own wounds that feels way more full and more whole. And my life around me is something that I'm proud of and excites me. And like, I love it. I'm not coming from a place of fear, uncertainty, or doubt. Do I still care for my ex? Yes, 100%. I wish her the best, like without a doubt. And are there moments where I still miss her? Yeah, 100%. That's totally human. But it doesn't mean that you're not ready to start dating again necessarily. I think honestly, it's a good thing to have. It means you really cared about someone and you were willing to be vulnerable and you were willing to express yourself and be with someone and go deep with somebody. That's how I would think about those parts that come up. There are parts of me that still miss her, that still care about her, and all those types of things. Without a doubt, that makes me human, and that's a good thing. It means I am capable of doing that and I can do it again with someone else. So I wouldn't look at that as necessarily a bad thing or a reason to not start to date again, or at least run the experiment.
Yeah, I think that that's inspiring. I mean, it's rough that there is no like right answer timeline wise that we can give you. It's unfortunately just a lot of testing, but we're here to help, give you the tools to make sure that that goes well and that you're going to be in a good place moving forward with that whole journey. Now I'm going to ask you something that's on the opposite end of the spectrum that we do a lot of short form content on, and that I knew you'd have a lot of big feelings about. So we're going to end with a bang here.
What do we
Someone
got?
asked, and this is for sure an anxious attachment of some sort. How do I reply to breadcrumbing if I want to have her back?
Alrighty, this is great. So if someone's giving you 10% of what you want, why on earth are you fighting for it like it's 100%, right? So I would argue that you don't actually want them. You want the version of them that shows up for 12 minutes every 2 weeks. So you're in love with potential. You're sold on what could be, not what is. And I've been there. I am weak to that as well. But the real question you got to be asking yourself in this is, why does intermittent attention feel so intoxicating to you? Why does unpredictability feel romantic instead of destabilizing? Why does maybe feel better than space, right? Because again, you're not craving them. You're really craving relief, and you're trying to find that relief outside of yourself. You're trying to close a loop, really, because breadcrumbing is not connection. It is, what it really is a dopamine drip and a way for you to pay attention to something outside of yourself as opposed to having to turn internally. Intermittent reinforcement is the exact way that casinos make money. Okay. It's how your ex keeps you hooked, and why no contact is really important for healing, right? It is the same. You're going through withdrawal, and your drug is that relationship, right? You're pulling the lever. It's the same lever that you pull in the casinos in this, okay? Because let's be honest here. Like, if they texted you consistently, would you even feel the spark that you're trying to find right now? Probably not, right? Because chaos is not chemistry. Anxiety is not attraction, okay? So why does someone choosing you halfway feel better than someone choosing you fully? Like, think about that. Who in your early life made you have to earn closeness? Who taught you that love comes in waves? Okay. This is the perfect example of what we were talking about at the very start of this conversation in relation to an anxious attachment. Okay. If they wanted you back, you wouldn't be confused. If they valued access to you, they would protect it. You don't need to decode breadcrumbs, my friend. Okay. You got to decide if the crumbs are acceptable or not. So you say you want them back, but what you're really saying is that I want the validation of being chosen, and you're willing to tolerate emotional instability to get it. That is not romance, my friend. That is not romance. That is a nervous system negotiating for safety, just like Bowlby found and Mary Ainsworth found in the children that they did the original attachment research on. Okay. Secure attachment and secure love feels calm. Okay. If you feel addicted, hyper-focused, and checking your phone every 6 minutes, that is not fate. That is activation. That is a nervous system that is completely dysregulated. So the real question is, if the energy they're giving you before you're even back together, if this is the energy right now that they're giving you, why do you think that once you get back together, it would be different or it would be better? And just sit with that question. Okay. Because again, breadcrumbing is connection without commitment. It just is not, they want access to you, but they don't want to take responsibility for it. It's intermittent reinforcement. And if you accept those crumbs, you teach them that that's enough.
Yeah, I think my favorite thing that you say about this, because we get, some variation of this question asked in like the DMs all of the time, is just like, if you reply to this, that's how you end up here. That's how you end up in my DMs more often.
100%. And I still love you. Let me just be clear here. If you listen to everything I just said and say, fuck you, Cody, and you still want to go try to do the thing, okay, fine. I am an experimenter at heart. Go run that experiment, man. See what happens. Come back and tell me. Prove me wrong. I would love to be wrong. I've seen it thousands of times for thousands of hours with hundreds of clients. But if I'm wrong, hell yeah, brother. I'm so happy for you. That's great. But if you really want her back, stop negotiating for half of her.
Yeah, and I think that's a powerful lesson on maybe, you know, you need to work on some things internally in like this anxious attachment journey person.
Yeah, 100%. And something else I'll mention here is if she does end up texting back or you stop replying and go no contact and they start to reach out, that's a really common pattern, which can light up that validation and that I'm chosen feeling again. I would really recommend saying something along the lines of like, hey, if you're reaching out to explore something intentional, I'm open to that. If not, I'm going to continue to take some space and just have that one in the barrel so that you're ready for inevitably when you pull back and they start to approach again. It's that anxious avoidant loop. We should probably do a whole thing on the anxious avoidant loop in general, but it's very common when you actually start to look at yourself and do the work on yourself. We just did an episode of the Attachment Translator on this exact freaking concept where in the skit, CJ was the anxious one. She was doing her work and she was starting to work through and rebuild self-esteem. And as she did that, the avoidant partner in the skit was like, wait, come back, and started to chase her more. And then CJ was like, no, I'm going to take a stand. And like, she was the hero. Great work, CJ. But that pattern is really common that you start to do this work. You start to like actually listen to what I'm saying and not ignore my videos and take action on the things I say. Surprise, surprise, change your life. And all of a sudden that toxic person, that more avoidantly attached person potentially wants to come back and approach and close that gap again because they're losing control essentially because you're focusing on yourself, which is good.
Yeah, for those attachment translator videos, go check out the My Brain Body Lab Instagram, or they're also posted here on YouTube Shorts. Also, any of like the polls and questions, the Ask Me Anythings that we put up are over there on the My Brain Body Lab Instagram. They go up every other Thursday. By the time this drops, there should be one up, so go over and check that out right now if you want to be a part of the next Ask Me Anything where we answer your questions here. But that's all we have for you today.
Boom. Hell yeah. This is great. I like this one. I love talking about attachments. I can't help myself. The other thing that we have just been kind of talking about inside, like between CJ and I, is doing some like live calls and stuff. So I know we're doing some research on how we could like execute upon that. But if that's something you would be interested in, hit us up in Instagram or drop a comment on here for us to do some like live calls type style things. I think that'd be really interesting to be able to do. But otherwise, I hope this video was super helpful. Make sure you like it, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And then go make sure you follow us on Instagram so that you can submit questions to our Ask Me Anything post on my story so that maybe we talk about your question in our next Ask Me Anything long form video. But otherwise, we'll see you next time. Thanks so much for hopping in here. Peace out, team.